This September will mark the 50th anniversary of Judge Arthur Garrity's decision to implement busing in the Boston Public Schools as a strategy to desegregate the school system. This past year, JFYNetWorks has featured 3 individuals who have had direct knowledge and experience in the long struggle for equity in education then and now. This month's podcast will highlight our conversations with JFY's Deputy Director and Director of Development, Paula Paris, community activist Lew Finfer, and civic legend Hubie Jones. This podcast was created by JFYNetWorks, a Boston-based nonprofit provider of blended learning resources, training, and support. JFY's individualized, self-paced curriculum helps raise individual and school performance by recovering learning loss, reaching and maintaining grade-level skills, and achieving college and career readiness. For JFYNetWorks, I'm Greg Cunningham. 1974 saw some of the most tumultuous moments in the long, tumultuous history of Boston, sparked by the implementation of busing as a court-ordered remedy for segregation in the Boston public schools. Busing was met with massive protests that included violent crowds throwing rocks at school buses filled with students. To protect the students, volunteers rode those buses, and Paula Paris was one of those courageous volunteers. She described her experience on the first day of busing to JFY's executive director, Gary Kaplan.
It was an experience that really, well, it's something I won't forget for sure.
Well,
Part of our training was to drop to the floor and to get kids on the floor.
Well, let's go. Hold on a second. That day, what day are we talking about?
We're talking about September 12th, 1974.
Okay, September 12th, 1974.
1974. It was warm. It was a warm September day, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I recall, because it was a thought that stuck in my mind and will remain in my mind, is the courage of the parents. I mean, we were entrusted with the safety of protecting the safety of the children who were getting on the bus.
So was this at Freedom House? This is at Freedom House?
It was around the corner from Freedom House.
All right, so it's September 12th, 1974. What time?
I don't know.
7 a.m., 8 a.m.?
7, somewhere between maybe 7:30 a.m. It was school bus boarding time.
And this is a historical moment about which there's a whole ton of stuff, but
sure.
You were there.
I was there.
Okay.
So
right.
That's the first thing. That's what I remembered, and I remembered the resolve of of those parents who were there because they felt that this was part, not so much a historic moment, but that the schools were finally going to would be open, that all schools in Boston would be open to all children.
What did you say to the kids as they were getting on the bus? Had the kids been trained previously?
I think so. That at least they had been. Yes, I'm pretty sure they had been. I was not part of that. We just, we said good morning, ready for the first day of school. Now, what would be interesting is to find, I don't remember any of them by name. We did ask their names, and we'd introduce ourselves, and we would be accompanying them. But I think it would really be, I know, Anthony Lucas interviewed 3 families, but finding some of those children and to get the experience from their side of the story. I mean, it's one thing to be trained to go into a particular situation, and they were quiet mostly, but what were they really feeling inside?
Well, there must be quite a few of them around. They would be in their 50s now, or maybe in their early 60s.
I would really love to meet up with them and talk with them and said, I don't want to say conformed, but we behaved the way we were trained to behave, knowing, at least as adults, that we were going into a hostile situation. And
how many of you were? So you were bus monitors, is that what you were called?
yeah, there were at least two of us on a bus, maybe even three.
That's all?
Yeah, because there actually weren't a lot of everybody who was enrolled to attend school that day did not show up that day.
Was there only one bus?
No, there were three. I'm pretty sure
Okay.
there were three. I'm thinking about, so the buses took us to Day Boulevard,
Yeah.
and then they consolidated the buses and went the rest of the way with a police escort.
From Day Boulevard
From
to
Day Boulevard, yes, they went with the police escort.
where were you going?
We were going to the, I want to say Galvin Middle School.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So
Yeah.
I was in the middle school bus, and then there was the high school bus.
Yeah.
But Day Boulevard was the central meeting place. And in the morning, it was, there were, the people had signs, and they had, terrible racial epithets written on them. But by the afternoon, when the police escorts again at Day Boulevard, and then put the kids on the bus to come back. We did not have to do the protocol because we did not have rocks thrown at our particular bus, but that was what we were prepared for. And when you have that kind of training, and I would imagine that this was like military training, you're not thinking about lots of other things because you are laser focused on that, keeping the kids safe. And why were we doing this? We were doing this because this was a matter of equal opportunity. This was the theme of the 60s and 70s, and this is what we believed in. I my impressionable years were the years of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King. So ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, and and service to the community. So that's why you were crazy enough to go into this in the first place. And you had a responsibility. Now, in the afternoon.
So wait, before we get to the afternoon. So we're still in the morning. The bus, you drive to Day Boulevard. Nothing happens. Nothing happens between
there was
Freedom
just
House.
Right. You could hear things in the loudspeakers, and people had bullhorns and whatever. But
even in Roxbury and Dorchester.
No, not in Roxbury.
No.
Oh no, this was when we got to.
This is after Day Boulevard.
Dorchester Avenue. I don't even remember the route. I
just remember. Well, it must have been Morrissey Boulevard.
It must have been Morrissey Boulevard,
yeah.
And there were lots of people out with, like I said, with loudspeakers and posters and placards and stuff. But by the afternoon, the bars had opened, and the people had a sufficient amount of whatever they were imbibing, and behavior was just a little bit more intense than it was in the morning.
Talk about the rocks.
Well, people were throwing rocks, and we had heard, and we were prepared that they were going to as the model for the integration in the South, that the buses were going to be targets. They were going to aim for the windows, and and again, did not happen to us. There was one bus that had been struck with two of the windows that cracked, but not broken. So I don't know why that was the case, whether or not that was the route, and whether or not people were just not close enough. But I think the fact that it was the Day Boulevard was chosen is that even though it was wide open, it was although I remember that there were people on the flat roofs of the houses and buildings there, and that was a little that gave me a little pause.
And they were doing what?
They were mooning, and worse. You saw things and you read things about desegregation in the South, and somehow were given the impression that that didn't happen here. But it did, certainly on a smaller scale. And seeing what human beings, the kind of behavior that human beings are capable of, it was a real eye-opener. And it didn't really, again, laser focus on getting the kids from point A to point B and then from point B back. And then we had a debrief. And then I went home and watched the news. And the news coverage, it wasn't until I saw the news coverage that I thought, oh my God, that was really dangerous. And that that really was it was the manifestation of the hostile environment, that we had been trained for. Again, that was really just laser focused on the task at hand and what to do. So I couldn't tell you the route because I spent most of the time just watching the kids and keeping and ready at any moment to get everyone on the floor, if necessary. So didn't do much sightseeing at the time, but it was it was a live experience, and something you just remember that human beings are capable of this behavior. People did not want the schools to be integrated. And the purpose of the integration to me, and I think, going back and reading the case, was an equality. And I think that was, and it was equality of resources. And that was mostly achieved, I think, but then the equity issues still remain. And we see it now because we can measure it now in a way that we didn't measure it, or it wasn't measured in the 60s, or in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, although it was always an issue. It was a continuous issue among the Boston branch of the NAACP and the office of the executive office of education, and among all of the community organizations, the other community organizations. And it still is.
Lew Finfer, a Boston community organizer since 1970, was described in an article published last year in the Boston Globe as a quiet leader who spent the past 4 decades orchestrating some of Boston's biggest campaigns for social and economic justice. Earlier this year, he answered this question posed by Gary Kaplan. Is equity in the Boston public schools better today than it was in 1974?
Yes, I think we are, even with the real trauma that took place in those years. But part of the court order was to set up racial ethnic parent councils in every school. And that was the first time that there were real parent groups, and let alone they were integrated. Garrity also set hiring goals for hiring teachers of color and principals of color, and the exam schools. He ordered them to be 1/3 students of color. So there were a number of positive things that he ordered that have changed, helped change the system. And not some of that would have happened, but not as dramatically without those court orders that were made, between 74 and 1980. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy over the busing plan and how he did it and how it could have been done differently. And there's a lot of controversies over that. Today, in some ways, we're still living with that, because if you're a parent in the Boston Public Schools, you can choose from anywhere from 10 to 12 elementary schools in the larger section of the city you live in. So they're not neighborhood schools. There still are not neighborhood schools in Boston like there still are in the suburbs. And it's a loss. It's a loss too. I mean, the schools were consciously segregated by actions of the school committee, which was documented in their own minutes. This decision was the right one, but there's a cost that when there's not a neighborhood schools, then the kids don't from a neighborhood don't have as many ways to meet each other. Parents don't have as many ways to meet each other, and the schools are not seen as institutions of the community. You pass by them. The Taylor School is 6 blocks from here, but you just go by it. Your kids, the kids from the neighborhood, that only a smaller number go to it. So it's there's a cost to it too.
Yeah. Well, you said back in 2005 that you thought it might have been better to pursue desegregation incrementally in steps rather than all at once, as Garrity did.
Yes.
Do you still think that?
I think there's a case for it. I don't want to hear other people's opinions and educators' opinion, but there's a case if they'd started it, say, with the elementary schools or the elementary and middle schools. Most of the biggest conflict and violence and so forth happened in high schools. It's not like there wouldn't have been similar levels of opposition if there was just busing and desegregation of the elementary schools, but the kids didn't beat each other, get into, those kinds of things in those schools. So there's a case for that, but also a large majority of schools did open peaceably, even though there were significant places where they did not. So, but I think there's a case for incremental, and then, it was done partially. Garrity, I think he grandfathered in seniors in high school to their current high school. So even he did some kinds of flexible things like that in his own court order. But I think there's a case for, obviously a lot of people would have liked it to be a metropolitan-wide order so that it was, there was shared across the whole region, this process, and it would have brought more money and motivated parents into it. But unfortunately, there was a Supreme Court case, if you can believe it, 1 month after Garrity's ruling in June of '74, there was a Supreme Court ruling called the Bradley decision, the Milliken decision, Milliken versus Bradley in Detroit. Yep. Ruled that desegregation and busing could only be done within a municipality. It wasn't metropolitan wide. That's right. And that was a 5-4 decision. And then Garrity, had to be mindful of that.
I've read, that was Rehnquist, I think. I think it was Rehnquist wrote the decision.
Yes.
And the famous phrase from that decision, he says something like, "Nothing is more sacred in America than local control of schools." Right. And that was it. That's why, you can't even, there's no point even talking about, metropolitan area or anything outside the city limits. It's unconstitutional according to that decision.
And President Nixon had 2 or 3 appointees when he was president, and that changed the court. And that's why it was 5-4. The same case under, if it was during the Johnson administration, would have been 5-4 or 6-3 the other way.
Yeah. And now, of course, it would be 6-3 the same way.
Yes.
Interesting. Do you think this is kind of a tangent, but do you think it will ever be possible to cross municipal boundaries with the schools?
Probably not, based on the traditions we have. I think you could perhaps set up some magnet schools. You could fund some magnet schools in the metropolitan area, but I don't think there's the political will or interest in doing that. And there's such a long tradition of the individual, school committees and individual so forth. So I don't think it would happen.
So looking at today, at right now, what do you think can be done right now to improve quality and equity in the Boston Public Schools?
I mean, we're trying to figure out our role in that question. We did come up with 3 proposals on education, which we've we met with Mayor Wu about, and we're going to meet with Superintendent Skipper about, and we're looking at a 4th one. But we're also going to be trying to do next year during the process of our forums more, find ways to listen more and research more to come up with other proposals for the schools. So we kind of see our 3 questions that we're trying to answer with our work over the next 2 years are what happened and lessons learned from the past and what now. And
those are your 3 questions. What happened, lessons learned,
and what now.
And what now?
So we have come up with a few proposals on education. We've started to bring forward, and we may look to develop further ones. There are obviously lots of things out there that seem compelling. The Globe, the thing about learning loss and tutoring and individual learning plans. And you, Gary, you know more about education policies that work, and you've made them work than I do. But those are some of the things we're talking about.
Hubie Jones has not only witnessed Boston history for 67 years, but has shaped and defined the civic and social landscape. He was featured in the recent PBS documentary, The Busing Battleground, the decades-long road to school desegregation, as part of the American Experience television series, in which many activists spoke of their efforts to bring people of different backgrounds together to encourage dialogue and understanding. The longtime dean of social work at Boston University, Hubie was in the habit of creating organizations to make that ideal a reality. He has created and led over 30 social and educational organizations in his long career. In 2003, he took on a new tack and found the Boston Children's Chorus, even though he freely admits he cannot carry a tune. The BCC has grown into a thriving, diverse group of young people from all over the city and the region, now comprising over 300 singers in 11 choirs, harnessing the power of music to connect the region's diverse communities, cultural empathy, and inspire social inquiry. The Boston Children's Chorus has performed its message of unity all over the world.
Well, I saw the Chicago Children's Choir sing at a city national convention in June of 2001. I knew nothing about this choir, and they came onto the stage, very diverse, high school, junior high school kids, and they sang at a level of excellence that blew me away. And I said, "Oh my goodness, this is the model I've been looking for," because I've tried to find ways to integrate kids across the divides of race, ethnicity, social class, sexual orientation, and not very successfully. And I said, this looks like the model. And then I went to Chicago 2 weeks later. Tell me all about how you did this. And I said, I don't know if we can do. I can pull this off in Boston, but if I do, would you agree to come and give a concert at Jordan Hall, so that Boston can see what it is we can build and how valuable it would be? And they said, yeah, we could do that. Like Martin Luther King weekend is like a three-day weekend, and we could come on that weekend if you ultimately pull it off. We did.
The vision of bringing students together through schools had begun with the founding of the METCO program in 1966, allowing urban students to attend suburban schools. Hubie has high hopes for extended partnerships on the METCO model to encourage college students and faculty to become more involved with the Boston Public Schools.
Long time ago. It was in the late 60s, early 70s. There was an attempt to do that. How you do it, I don't know, but we do have the strongest, most enduring metropolitan educational system in the country. METCO being one part of it. You now have charter schools being a part of it. We need to think through whether this is a vision that should be pursued in the future. We have 350,000 students, college students, in the greater Boston community. Mm-hmm. Lots of faculty members. We have intellectual firepower that you couldn't believe. We're not putting it to use. We're not harnessing this intellectual firepower to solve civic problems in Boston. It is crazy. The university people, as far as I'm concerned, only think about how they can bring more foreign students here that have a lot of money and play a role in their financial success. They won't stand up and say anything, have a voice around major issues where they ought to have a voice. Now, I will say that during the desegregation of the schools, Garrity got brought in the colleges to play a role with the Boston Public Schools. And one of the presidents of one of the major universities here, who will be nameless, said, Hubie, I'm pulling out of this partnership with the schools because they waste our time. I send my faculty over to work and they don't know what to do with us. And so I'm out of this.
Yeah.
Now I'm not leaving publicly. Nobody's going to say I'm not being a good corporate person here.
Yeah.
It's a good citizen here. But in reality, we're not going to waste our time. And apparently a lot of the universities feel that way. They don't want to be caught up in all kind of political nonsense, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But hey, if I was 40 years old, I'd be starting a new organization that would be the Center for Community and University Collaboration.
Hubie makes it clear that when all is said and done, students need a reason to attend school, and schools should be happy, joyous, safe places, sanctuaries for students to thrive.
What I mean is that you have to have within the schools things like the arts, music, plays, dance, which are joyous things that are a part of the learning process. Because if there's no joy in a school, if there's no joy in learning, then who's going to invest in it in any major way? And I think this is, there's no debate about that.
We would again like to thank Paula Paris, Lew Finfer, and Hubie Jones for their willingness to be part of the JFYNetWorks podcast this year. If you have any questions or comments, please navigate to our website, jfynet.org, which features a wealth of commentary, dialogue, and free educational resources, including these podcasts, in order to support all education communities. Thank you for joining us. For JFYNetWorks, I'm Greg Cunningham.